Wow. I am so excited to share this story with you. The story of Cecilia. I've been doing a series called Sheroes of the Faith. And I had a list of women that I wanted to cover in this series. And I've done five or six, and I probably have five or six more that I have on a list. But I got a little sidetracked because I have discovered a couple women as a result of my research that have actually just blown my mind. And this woman, Cecilia, I had never heard of before. Even though today, November 22nd, as I'm recording this, is the feast day that celebrates her life and her death and even after death, which is so interesting. So let me just back up just a little bit, not really back up, but let me explain why we have not heard of these amazing women. There are multiple reasons. And on the last episode, I did give just a short synopsis of why I decided to do these Sheroes as far as a lot of history that involves women has been lost, church history. And it because it didn't fit the narrative of the hierarchy of the patriarchy that ruled the church. Now, in the early church years, which I'm going to be talking about, Cecilia, in the early church years, there was so much more acceptance of women being equal because one of the most transformative things about the gospel of Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, is that there was no Jew or Greek, there was no male or female. And it was very empowering to a lot of these beautiful, intelligent women who never had a voice. They when they found Christ, they found a voice and a cause. You know, I love the saying, I'm a rebel with a cause. And my cause is I'm rebelling against the current culture, and I am submitting to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords to share the good news of the gospel. So these women were rebels with a cause because they lived in a very wicked time in the first century. And I want to tell you about Cecilia, who one of the most amazing things about these women that I've been talking about in the first, second century, they were hijacked by the Catholic Church. No offense to you if you're Catholic, no offense, but you couldn't help it. You weren't born then. Which did not exist at the time. So what has happened is retrospectively, they went back and took some of these amazing saints that died for the cause of Christ or that were just heroes or sheroes and made them Catholic. Well, the Catholic Church did not even exist until some say the 4th century, some say the 6th century. Now, the Catholic Church says it has existed since Christ. Sorry, not true. As a matter of fact, the Romans, which the Roman Catholics, they merged with the political system of the in the Roman times, was destroyed. Really, the Roman system was destroyed by Christians because the Roman empire fell because of their decadence and sin, and because the Christians became powerful and began to dismantle the culture by the gospel. And I just want to say right now that so many times we want to do in spiritual warfare and go shout at principalities and powers that rule over different regions and nations. But if we just simply fulfill the Great Commission and people become saved in great numbers, that's how we change a region. And that's what they did in the early church. Now, if you believe that Catholic Church started with Christ, then you believe that Peter was a Catholic, but the Romans, which were, Catholics didn't exist, the Romans crucified him and killed him. He was the first what they deem bishop or pope of the early church. And we know that's not true. So you have to dig through a lot of lies to find the truth and these amazing stories of so many of the early church sheroes. I just encourage you to go back through this series and learn about some of these amazing women. So how did I find Cecilia? Well, as I was looking into Thecla, right? The other person that I found that had not been exposed to was Princess Eugenia, and she also inspired Princess Cecilia. So there was a whole movement of young women in the decadent Roman times when sexuality was a cult, very much like today. There is so much sexual confusion in our current culture as there was in that first and second century, because of the decadence of the Romans, who had just really thrown all morality to the wind. There was no more Judeo, there was no Jewish influence, or obviously Christians were brand new on the scene, bringing all this morality. But what happened was a lot of these young women took a vow of celibacy to actually, because of the confusion in the culture, because of the decadence of the sexual sin cults and the sexual prostitution of that was involved with the worship of the false gods and idols, that these women just decided, we will be celibate. Now, this enraged the culture because women weren't allowed to even say who they were going to marry, much less say they weren't going to get married. So this is where we pick up on Cecilia. She was inspired by Thecla, who had vowed herself to celibacy. And I am seeing more and more younger people who right now in this current culture, who have come to me to speak to me about, I don't know, but I think I may be called to be celibate and just become a bride of Christ. Listen, if this is what God has called you to for a season, if this is what God has called you to for your life, there is a precedent for this. And some of the greatest women who had power with God and were using the gifts of the Spirit that I even know personally, even through my childhood, were women who gave themselves fully to God and became his bride on this earth. So if God is dealing with you in that way, don't think you're strange, because this is a precedent. Now, in this society, it's just as bizarre as it was in that first or second century, because we are literally living in our current culture is a cult of sex, where your sexuality deems your identity, which is, only happened back in times like the Roman period. So anyway, let's talk about Cecilia. This is a woman who is defined not only by the vow of celibacy and the radical life that she led, but her calling was to music. She was a psalmist, she was a musician, she was a composer, and she was a martyr. So let's talk about her. If you go into museums around the world, you will see beautiful sculptures of Cecilia. She was a beautiful young woman. If you look into the annals of music, there have been symphonies composed in her name. There have been even modern records like the Foo Fighters did a Cecilia record. And like I said, there is a Saint Cecilia festival on November 22nd, and that is the day that I'm recording this video. So my research on Thecla and Eugenia led me to find Cecilia. This is a woman who was so inspired and inspiring. Hosea 2:21 was one of her life verses. I will espouse you to me forever. So let's talk about it. Nobody really knows when she was converted. From all accounts, as she was a very young child, she sang songs to the Lord and had a heart to sing psalms and memorize psalms and write music. Now, this is something that's very dear to my heart, because as a little girl, I would write songs, sing songs to the Lord, and I would take time alone to ride my horse out into the fields and sing to the Lord to the rhythm of the beating hooves. This is just something that Cecilia had as a child that I really identify with. she was dedicated fervently to her Christian beliefs, and she went so much further than most of the people did in her culture. This would determine her destiny for her life. So as the pages of her life turned, her parents were not believers at first, and she found herself betrothed from her parents. She was a very wealthy Roman young woman, a princess of the Roman society. And they lived in a beautiful mansion, which still stands today as a cathedral to Cecilia. So now suddenly I want to go to Rome after sharing all of these amazing stories with you. I'm finding that there are still monuments. There are even some of the torture devices, some of the other saints that I have shared with you all around Italy, Rome, and that area. So her home is still there. It is extremely beautiful. So she lived in the lap of luxury, and she was betrothed to a young man who was also had his status in society, and he was a man of breeding, as they would say back in those days. His name was Valerian. So as she was being married to Valerian, she went through a wedding, and at her wedding, they had a band of all the finest musicians. And one of the things that really started this whole separation for Cecilia, she was in her wedding on her wedding day, and they began to play the secular music of the time. Cecilia began to sing lyrics unto the Lord to the tune that the musicians were playing. Well, everyone was shocked by this. This was just very odd. And she began to sing and worship the Lord, and the presence of the Lord came down in her wedding. And her husband Valerian was like, what is the deal here? What is going on? Who are you? I don't know that if he knew her before or if they met in the church that day, or not the church, obviously they weren't married in church, but in maybe her home that day. But he was like, what is going on here? Because the presence of the Lord was so evident. And this is why, because Cecilia was accompanied by an angel of music, and her guardian angel accompanied her in singing. Many times people would hear her singing, and even at her wedding, some reported that there were angelic voices accompanying her as she worshiped the Lord, and the presence of the Lord came into her wedding. So this was a marked day for Cecilia. When she got alone with her new husband, Valerian, he's like, what in the world just happened? What happened as you were singing? I need to know, like, what is going on. And she said, I want to make a vow to you, Valerian. I want you to know that I have made a vow to God that I am his betrothed, and I'm going to live a life of celibacy. And I have an angel that accompanies me everywhere I go. And you heard my angel worshiping with me. And he said, I want to see this angel. Like, he didn't call her crazy as far as we know, but he said, I feel like that there was a manifestation at her wedding that he didn't question her, because he said, I want to see the angel. And she said, if you want to see my angel, then you need to give your life to God as I have and be baptized by the pastor of our church. So they went into up on a mountaintop and to a place where there was a baptismal. Kind of reminds me of, like, those places in Utah where they have those hot baths. I'm not sure what they had in Rome where they could go up on a mountain and be baptized, but she did that. She went up on the mountain. He was baptized, and as soon as he was baptized, and he was became a believer because he saw her angel, and he was able to see her angel. And so he said, I too am making a sacred vow to be celibate and to honor your vow, and I also will take the vow. So she had a godly husband who honored her in that way. So it takes a dramatic turn when his brother, Valerian's brother, who was named let's see, what is his name? I wrote it down here because it's hard for me to remember. His name was not Tiberius, but similar to Tiberius, Tiberius, I believe is his name. And he also was at the wedding. Hello, it was his brother, I'm sorry, Valerian's brother. And he was so like blown away by what happened at the wedding. And his brother came to him and said, listen, this is what I saw, this angel that accompanies her. That's why when she sings, that all of heaven comes down. And I actually saw the angel and I gave my heart to the Lord. Well, her brother was very prominent in Roman society and as a leader politically. Tiberius was his name. And he became a believer as well. So the three of them began to preach and sing and share. And Tiberius, being so prominent in as a Roman citizen and a leader, began to do works of charity with his brother and his sister-in-law, and they began to make a difference in society. And people in the ruling classes of Rome really began to have a revival. Well, of course, what happens? The rulers of that time, the Roman rulers, called Tiberius into basically court and said, what's going on with you? Like, we've heard that you're a Christian. And he said, it is true. His brother was there. Valerian was there with him, who went to court with him, like just as a support. And he said, well, if you're going to, persecute him, I want you to know that I am a Christian as well. And I've given my heart to the Lord, and I will not deny my faith. So they were beheaded immediately. No, and this is something that's very interesting. We've been reporting on all these martyrs that they took into the arena and made a public spectacle of their deaths. And they had all of these miracles where they didn't die and, or it was very hard to kill them. And there were miraculous things that happened in the arena. Well, this had happened so often that the Roman rulers of that time said, we can't take Tiberius to the arena and Valerian. They're well known, they're popular, and we can't risk. I mean, I'm just saying they must have said we can't risk any more of these miracles and people being saved in the masses by going to the arena. It's backfiring. Okay. This is what always happens when the enemy attacks a child of God. He goes too far. He oversteps his bounds and it backfires on him. Okay. So, but they were beheaded right there on the spot. Now, Cecilia was not there. So the Roman ruler said, okay, we've got to obviously we know that Cecilia is also a Christian. They heard all about her good works, her not politically correct behavior. So they sent some Roman soldiers to her mansion where she was. And she had such a beautiful mansion. She had her own spa in there. And they took her and they put her in her steam bath, which she had in her home. And they turned up the temperature, however they did it, with putting logs on the fire. I don't know how they actually did it, but to a dangerous level. And they locked her in for 36 hours. For 36 hours, she was in heat that was so hot that it would kill a normal person within like 30 minutes. She survived for 36 hours and did not break a sweat. So they couldn't suffocate her. So one of the Roman soldiers went and said, listen, we're going to have to do something else. So she went and they went into her steam bath. They opened the door and they had sent for an executioner with a sword. And she laid on the slab in the steam bath on a marble slab. It was a marble steam bath. And you'll see why this is relevant in a minute. And they tried 3 attempts to cut her head off with a sword. And there were marks and wounds where they actually penetrated the skin, but it didn't kill her. So the executioner said, I'm not doing it again. So even though her head was almost severed, she was still alive. She laid there for 3 days and preached, and people were coming in droves to her mansion to come to see her, and she was preaching. And as she survived in her dying condition for those 3 days, the people that came and that were won to the Lord by her, she was giving them all her earthly possessions, her clothing, her furniture. She even gave away her home to the church to be used as a house of worship. For her last 3 days, she won so many people to the Lord. She finally died. And when she died in a position where her head was turned and she was on this marble slab. Well, they buried her. Now, remember, she was a very wealthy woman. They put her in a cypress casket on top of that marble slab, and they built a custom casket for her. And, Christians were coming to her funeral. It was quite a spectacle, and they kept her in the same position that she was in, with her arms crossed, and she had her 3 fingers this way, representing Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and 1 finger here crossed, and that meant for one God, because that's what she was preaching as she died. And her head was turned to the side. There was blood, blood-soaked silk garments at her feet. They put all of that in her casket. Well, this is something that is really bizarre. And there's a scripture in Psalms that talks about a non-corrupted, that God saves those that are incorruptible. His beloved knows no decay in Psalm 16. And so they sang songs. There were songs devoted to her. And like I said, her mansion is still there in Rome, and it is now a cathedral. Now, in about the 1800s, the 800s, when they built the cathedral around her home, and it became a Catholic cathedral, they wanted to find her remains and put it in the house. So the Pope at the time, he was, let's see, I'm trying to see his name. There was a Pope in the year 821. And that Pope Pascal, he said he had a vision. And in this vision, he saw Saint Cecilia, and she said, "My remains are at a catacomb on Saint Callistus. He is the one who buried me and took me to his tomb and buried me." So the Pope went there. He opened the catacomb where this was said, and there was the cypress casket. They opened it up, and on the marble slab was Cecilia's body intact. And they said it actually had a sweet smell. So he commissioned a young sculptor named Stefano Maderno, and he commissioned that sculptor to sketch her body and take measurements and carve her in marble in the position of her martyrdom. So he did. And this was a young artist who had never really had anything significant happen in his life. But this is one of the most famous statues in all of art history. And it is there on the altar at her cathedral to this day. And it is absolutely stunning. So in 1599, another Pope, let's see, there's something else happened. Well, I can't find it. In 1599, they dedicated the whole thing to Cecilia, and there are many copies of that statue all over the world. And Cecilia's, her legacy is one of music, because they attribute to her that she was the inventor of the pipe organ. She played many musical instruments. She played the lute, which was like a guitar. She played a keyboard, which was like a pipe, was pipes or whatever. It basically wasn't a keyboard, it was pipes. And she made a keyboard to go along with those pipes and made a pipe organ. So she is attributed to be the inventor of, what is that? Beethoven, or was it Bach, called it the king. I'm sorry, Mozart called it the king of instruments, which is the organ. All right. So I'm telling you, this woman was amazing. Cecilia, she was a virgin, betrothed to Christ. She had a godly marriage. She was a martyr. She was a psalmist. She was a musician. She had signs, wonders, and miracles throughout her life. She was a healer as well. People came to her to be prayed for healing. And this was an amazing young woman who didn't live a long time, but made such a huge impact that we should still be we should still be reaping that story, the miracle signs and wonders of a devoted life to this day. So if you've enjoyed this story about Cecilia and you want to know more about some of the Sheroes of the faith, just like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on your notifications if you want to see when a new one drops. I have so many more exciting stories to share with you. And feel free to share it as well. Be blessed. Shalom, shalom.